The most dangerous moment in an alliance is when belief quietly disappears. For decades, South Korea lived under a promise that America would step in, no matter the cost, no matter the risk. But today, that promise is being tested, not by words, by missiles. North Korea is getting closer to something that changes everything: the ability to strike the US homeland. Not Seoul, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. And once that line is crossed, one question becomes unavoidable. Would Washington really trade its own cities for Seoul? South Koreans are no longer whispering this question. They are asking it openly, in polls, in politics, in public debate. This is where a controversial idea enters the room. Quietly, uncomfortably, nuclear latency, not a nuclear weapon, not a test, not a declaration, but the ability to build one fast, in months, not years. It sounds alarming. It feels dangerous. And yet, when you look at the alternatives facing Washington, this may be the least bad choice left. If you want to understand why America may soon tolerate what it once tried to prevent, stay with me. Because to grasp this moment, we first need to understand the problem beneath the promise. The debate is not really about submarines, or uranium, or even nuclear weapons. At its core, this is about trust and fear. The United States says its security guarantee to South Korea remains ironclad. Extended deterrence, a nuclear umbrella, a promise backed by history. But from Seoul's perspective, something has changed. The threat is no longer abstract. North Korea is no longer limited to regional reach. Its missiles are evolving toward the American homeland. That single shift alters the entire equation, because deterrence is not just about capability. It is about willingness. South Korea must now ask whether US leaders would truly accept the risk of nuclear retaliation on American cities to defend an ally, even with consultations, even with joint planning, even with visible commitment. Washington believes reassurance can solve this problem. More dialogue, more mechanisms, more symbolism. But reassurance does not eliminate doubt. And doubt in nuclear strategy is corrosive. This is why the conversation is moving quietly from absolute reliance toward hedging. To understand why that shift feels inevitable, we need to look backward at how this dilemma was created in the first place. The roots of this dilemma go back decades to choices made when the world looked simpler. After the Cold War, the global system settled into a bargain: non-proliferation in exchange for protection. Allies would stay non-nuclear. The United States would extend its deterrent. South Korea accepted that deal repeatedly, even as North Korea walked away from it. When Pyongyang left the NPT and pursued nuclear weapons, Seoul doubled down on restraint. It trusted the alliance. It trusted Washington's word. For years, that choice made sense. North Korea could threaten the peninsula, but not the United States itself. That distinction mattered because it kept American and South Korean security aligned. But nuclear strategy runs on credibility and timelines, and both have shifted as North Korea's capabilities advanced. The gap between defending Seoul and defending American cities began to narrow. Extended deterrence started to feel stretched, not broken, but strained. And when deterrence strains, states look for insurance. That instinct, not ambition, not ideology, is what brings us to the first rupture in this system. And it arrives suddenly. The first rupture did not come from a missile test. It came from public opinion. For years, support for nuclear weapons in South Korea was taboo, unthinkable, unnecessary. Then something shifted. Even after Washington tried to reassure Seoul through declarations, through consultative groups, through visible signals of commitment, the numbers kept climbing. Support dipped briefly, then rebounded stronger than before. By early 2024, nearly 3 out of 4 South Koreans supported an independent nuclear arsenal. And after Donald Trump returned to office, that number rose again. This was the warning sign, not of defiance, but of fear. Fear that reassurance was not protection. Fear that promises could fail under pressure. Fear that when the moment came, decisions would be made in Washington, not Seoul. This is what policymakers often miss. Deterrence does not collapse suddenly. It erodes quietly. Through doubt, through polling numbers, through political pressure. If you are Washington, this is the moment you worry. Because public opinion, once hardened, is difficult to reverse. And if ignored, it forces far more dangerous choices later. If this tension continues unchecked, the next stage is no longer theoretical. What comes next is not a decision. It is a mechanism. Nuclear latency is often misunderstood. It is not about breaking rules overnight. It is about shortening distance. The most difficult step in building a nuclear weapon is not design. It is not testing. It is producing fissile material, enrichment, reprocessing. Once a country masters these technologies, the clock changes. Years become months. Barriers become political, not technical. South Korea acquiring these capabilities would not by itself violate the NPT. That is the crucial detail. It would stay inside the system, but close to the edge. This is why Washington has always been cautious, because latency spreads. If one ally is allowed to hedge, others will ask for the same space. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, others watching closely. From Washington's perspective, this looks like erosion of the non-proliferation regime. From Seoul's perspective, it looks like survival insurance. And this tension between global rules and local fear is what defines the current moment. Because when systems are stressed, states do not wait for perfect solutions. They prepare for worst cases. And that preparation brings us to the second surge of risk. The second surge of risk comes from the alternatives, and none of them are clean. One option is to do nothing, maintain the status quo, reassure, repeat commitments, hope belief holds, but belief is already weakening. And hope is not a strategy. Another option is redeploying US tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. On paper, it looks decisive. In reality, it solves very little. Those weapons would remain under American control. Launch authority would sit in Washington, not Seoul. In a real crisis, timelines would compress. Minutes, not hours. South Korea would push for shared control. The United States would refuse. The result is the worst combination. Higher visibility, higher vulnerability, no real autonomy. And then there is the option Washington fears most, a fully nuclear South Korea. Once that door opens, Washington faces an impossible choice: support it and shatter the non-proliferation regime, or oppose it and risk losing a critical ally. Either path weakens American power globally, regionally, strategically. This is the moment policymakers try to avoid. The moment where all remaining options are bad, which is why, quietly, nuclear latency starts to look different. Not as a solution, but as damage control, because sometimes the second best choice is the only way to prevent the worst one. Now, shift the lens from strategy to life, from states to people, because for you, this debate is not abstract. You live under timelines measured in minutes, sirens, alerts, decisions made faster than fear can catch up. When deterrence feels uncertain, it does something subtle. It changes how safe you feel waking up, how you think about the future, how much you trust distant promises. This is why nuclear latency resonates. Not because people want weapons, but because they want control, a sense that their fate is not entirely outsourced. The idea is simple. If the worst happens, South Korea would not start from zero. That knowledge alone alters behavior. It raises the cost of aggression. It narrows the space for miscalculation. And for you, that margin matters. It is the difference between panic and pause, between escalation and restraint. If you've ever wondered why public support keeps rising despite reassurances, this is the reason. Because fear listens to capability, not declarations. If this perspective helped you see the issue differently, share it, talk about it. These conversations shape the choices leaders make. But this story doesn't stop at Korea. Because the moment one ally hedges, the world takes notice. What happens in Korea never stays in Korea. Especially now, if Washington accepts South Korea's nuclear latency, every capital is watching closely, not because they want weapons tomorrow, but because they want options. Allies in volatile regions will ask the same question. If Seoul can hedge, why not us? And rivals will draw their own conclusions. North Korea would face a new calculation. Limited attacks become riskier. Coercion becomes less reliable. China, too, would take notice. Not just of Korea, but of American priorities. Allowing nuclear-powered submarines framed as regional burden sharing signals something larger, that Washington is adapting, that it is reallocating pressure. That deterrence in Asia is no longer centralized. There is also an economic dimension, often overlooked. Russia and China dominate the global nuclear fuel market. Low-enriched uranium, high-assay fuel for next-generation reactors. South Korea entering that space changes the balance. It diversifies supply, it reduces dependence, it strengthens energy security for U.S. partners. In this sense, latency is not only about deterrence, it is about leverage, strategic, economic, geopolitical. And once leverage shifts, so does the future. Which brings us to the final question, where does this path lead? The future now splits into three paths, not predictions, scenarios. The first is restraint with control. Washington allows nuclear latency under strict safeguards. Oversight is tight, breakout is detectable, deterrence stabilizes. South Korea feels less exposed. North Korea hesitates. The alliance holds. This is not ideal, but it is managed. The second path is drift. Latency expands without clarity. Rules blur. Trust erodes on all sides. Allies begin hedging quietly. Rivals test boundaries. The non-proliferation regime weakens, not with a bang, but with a shrug. Then there is the third path, the one everyone wants to avoid. South Korea crosses the line openly. Washington hesitates. The alliance fractures, or the rules collapse. In that world, nuclear weapons spread faster than diplomacy can keep up. Deterrence becomes unstable. Miscalculation becomes likely. These scenarios are not choices made once. They are trajectories shaped by delay, denial, or discipline. The lesson is uncomfortable. Systems rarely fail because leaders choose catastrophe. They fail because leaders avoid hard decisions too long. And that is why latency matters, not as an end state, but as time bought, which brings us to the final insight. This debate is not about whether nuclear latency is good. It isn't. It is about whether it is tolerable in a world where better options are disappearing. Washington did not create this dilemma alone. North Korea's advances reshaped it, geography intensified it, public fear accelerated it. The question now is not perfection. It is prevention, allowing South Korea controlled nuclear latency. Buys time to reinforce deterrence, time to manage risk, time to prevent a far more dangerous outcome. It preserves the alliance, it supports U.S. strategy in Asia, and it keeps Washington inside the decision loop. Instead of reacting to a fait accompli, the non-proliferation regime survives not by rigidity, but by adaptation, by choosing the least damaging path when all paths carry cost. If this analysis helped you see the logic behind a controversial choice, stay with me. Share this perspective. The next chapter of global security will be shaped by how well we understand the trade-offs no one wants to talk about. Because in a world of imperfect options, the most prudent choice is often the least bad one.